Welcome to Arizona Opera's second episode of UnMic'd, the video series that explores the blurry edge between opera and just about everything else. I'm really excited about today's episode. This piece today really captures sort of the nexus of what UnMic'd is about. Taking an element from the world of opera, stage combat, and bringing it together with the world of real combat. And then we have a special guest who sort of life has synthesized those two elements and adds a third, and you'll understand that in just a minute. I'm joined today by one of the most dominant trainers in the world of MMA, Greg Jackson of Jackson Wink MMA in Albuquerque, New Mexico. His gym has prepared some of my favorite mixed martial artists in the world, people like John Jones and Holm. It's just such an honor to have you with us today, Greg. Thank you for coming on. We got Joe Isenberg, an accomplished fight choreographer who's worked with opera companies, including Washington National Opera, the Metropolitan Opera. He has won a number of awards, including the 2013 Helen Hayes Award for Outstanding Choreography. Joe, it's great to have you with us today. And Joe's the guy that has hair. Just to be clear, two Joes today, one bald, and then Joe Isenberg sort of showing off. And then our third guest today is George Birkadze, who I've had the pleasure of knowing for about 2 years now. He is an internationally recognized dancer and choreographer. He works with Boston Ballet, and his dance work has been featured around the globe, but he is also a martial artist, a high-level martial artist with a black belt in Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, in Kyokushin-kai Karate, and he is also a Judo black belt. So we've got really an amazing team here today, all of whom have exposure to opera, and I didn't put this on the preparation questions, but one of the most exciting things that came as revelation as we were putting today's episode together was my correspondence with Greg Jackson just coming up on New Year's Eve, and Greg shared with me that he has been a lifelong lover of opera, and you don't always hear that from folks that are in the space of MMA. So that was just an amazing reinforcement of what's so special about this series. So thank you guys so much for being here today.
Thank you.
So the crux of the episode today is to talk about how do the worlds of opera, dance, and stage combat relate to the world of the octagon, the MMA world. And I was thinking about stage combat as such an essential element of the dance that is opera. And then thinking, wow, what are the relationships between that work and the work of people that are really preparing for fights in the professional fight world. George gets to bring a perspective here, being a professional dancer, but also adding this element of choreography. Dance in itself has an element that relates to stage combat and to martial arts. So I'm expecting a really fun conversation today, guys, and looking forward to it. So I'm just going to sort of dive right in with a question for Greg and Joe. From your perspective, what's the biggest difference between fighting technique when used for the stage or film versus fighting in the ring? And we've all seen real boxing matches, but we've also seen Rocky with those big looping punches. Let me start with you, Greg. You've choreographed or at least consulted on fighting for film with that Kingdom, one of my favorite binge-worthy shows on Netflix this summer. Let me throw it to you first. What are the kinds of things you have to do technically adapting between one or the other? What are the biggest differences?
Well, my unfortunate choreography career includes also the Warrior movie and a movie called
Range 15 summer too.
A movie called Range 15 that was done by a bunch of special forces guys that I had to kind of throw together. None of it worthy of your other guests, unfortunately, but it was my best effort at the time.
Hey, I liked Warrior. We're gonna have to talk about that.
It was fun. I will say that for me, the one, I mean, obviously there's huge similarities, but one of the biggest differences is the subtleties of it. So at least when I'm watching, you have to be able to convey drama, I think, in actual stage combat. Like, if the audience doesn't know exactly what happened, it finds itself confused, or like, wait, why did he fall down? What happened there? So I think subtlety is one of the biggest differences, because of course in a fight, you don't want the audience or your opponent to know what exactly just happened. So keeping things hidden, keeping things kind of low key is the wrong word, but not telegraphed, wherein I think stage combat, you have to communicate the drama of the scene, and it has to make sense to people. I think if people are confused, it takes them out of that process of enjoying, the fight or whatever.
Yeah.
So I think that might be one of the big differences in my opinion.
Can you give an example before we pivot over to Joe? Can you give an example maybe of a single technique, whether it's a striking technique or a grappling technique, where you could sort of drill down into what does that mean? That adaptation.
Let's go very simple. A straight right hand, in other words, a straight right punch. If you are going to punch somebody in the nose with your right hand, if you do that in fighting, you want to make that as linear and as non-telegraphed as possible. But it's also very fast. So if that happens very fast, very linear, and very non-telegraphed, and it hits the person, and you're at even a little bit of the wrong angle, you don't exactly know what happened. And so then they have these instant replays and all these things to say, well, how did he knock him out? What happened there exactly? You have to ask yourself that over and over. Well, you don't really have, at least in my experience, especially in opera, instant replays wherein you can look back at the fight scene and say, wait, how did he fall down? So I think it's incumbent on the choreographer to be able to show a big enough technique. The shoulders are rolling, the punch is coming, and pow, it hits, and everybody goes, oh my goodness, he got hit, and down he goes, and it makes sense logically. There's no missing element there. But in fighting, if you did that, if you were like, here comes my punch, and it's coming right at you, the straight right hand, obviously your opponent's going to be, well, you're not hitting me with that, so I will move out of the way and counter you. So I think even at the basic level, it has to be very different. And of course, there's a ton of similarities too. I'm just kind of speaking to one of the differences.
No, that makes a lot of sense. So let's throw it over to Joe. You have an assertion over here. The movement's got to be real big if it's in opera. Everything else is big in opera, right?
I mean, I really love what you're saying about telegraphing, because that's exactly what we need to do. One of the major issues that we have in telling the story of the fight, first of all, when does the fight take place? It's always at the pinnacle of the dramatic structure. So opposed to like a fighting match, the dramatic structure is basically the whole fight. And there's a whole bunch of details within the fight in, like, say, a boxing match. But opposed to an opera, we've been waiting for 3 hours to get to this fight. And then all of a sudden, like, it's just going to explode into whatever cacophony that is. And that in itself is the thing that we're trying to highlight in that one super intense moment. When it comes to the specific techniques, right now we're focusing on like MMA or boxing or hand-to-hand, generally speaking. But, we also need to keep in mind, well, what are the givens of the specific narrative? So what weapons are we using? Is this a sword fight? Is this fighting a dragon? Is this, flying over, mountains and then doing whatever they're doing? So, like, there are definitely parallels. And knowing that to tell the narrative of engagement and conflict, that is definitely the same thing. But telegraphing is very important. And one of the things that I always like to say is to actually watch a real fight, like not in a ring, but like on the side of the street or something. Most of the time, nobody has any idea what the people are doing. Like, they hit each other and then they go on the ground and then they're just like rolling around and somebody's pants falls off and you're like, oh my gosh. But like, if you actually did that on stage, exactly what we were saying is like, no one will know what's happening. And if no one knows what's happening, then we've actually failed in telling the story.
Right. No, that makes a lot of sense. And I'm guessing, I mean, there's a lot of research involved in the work that you do, Joe. I'm thinking that the adaptation between real combat and stage combat probably also applies to this historical overlay. You probably want things, how would this person hit this other person like a gentleman in this point of time, or fighting a dragon or what have you? How much does that historical element play into feeling like you've done your job to make it real?
It does, and we alluded to three different forms at the beginning of this, where we were talking about film, we're talking about reality, and we're talking about stage. And there really does need to be a distinction between film and stage, mostly because the performers on stage, specifically for opera, they're opera singers. And when film normally does their filming, you know, sometimes you have your principal performer, your Harrison Ford, who might do a punch or whatever. But generally speaking, there are specialty people for film who are athletes, who are 100% able to do the technique, to do it safely, to repeat it. And they get away with a lot more potentially dangerous activities that you would not want Placido Domingo or any other major opera singer who might be older to be doing. And in that context, we need to cater to a potentially less confident combatant. The other element is that on stage, you can't stop. And that's the major issue. When you're filming, you can always do it over, and as long as it's recorded, then it'll always be there. So when it comes to research, one of the best examples that I always like to give, again, is like Romeo and Juliet, right? There's a great reference to how Mercutio was trained in a certain kind of combat style for that time period, which was a certain part of Italy, opposed to Tybalt, who was trained in a different kind of style. So both of them were just as capable as fighters to be able to engage and just as equal, but in different styles. And for the nerd out there who's actually watching it, who could tell the difference in the styles, that would be an interesting thing. I think that that's a little bit of overkill for me to actually spend the time and teach that, but that is a great example of just saying, well, this is a character-driven moment of how they move and how they fight. That is a nice detail that you could interlay with like the general narrative of the fight. Just one more point is like, it sounds like a boxer and a kickboxer in like a cage match. It's like they have different skills, but they're both equally good at beating each other up.
Right. And your constraint is always the physicality of the performer that you're working with, who probably is not, in most cases, someone that's trained as a fighter. So you need to work within those constraints.
I mean, I think all opera singers are fighters. So.
That is true. That is true. That is true. You know, we were talking earlier today about this episode and what it's about. I think there's something so soulful about opera and fighting that connects to human drama in this very primal way. I mean, I used to, I don't know what you'll think about this, but before opera auditions, I was an opera singer for a period of time. And before my opera auditions, I used to love watching the documentary When We Were Kings about Muhammad Ali's fight with George Foreman, the Rumble in the Jungle. And because I just loved how giant those people were, and just this epic battle between these two very different forces, and it felt like an opera to me, and that's why I'd watch that. I'd get up if I had an audition at 10, I'd be watching that movie at 6 a.m. To get my blood going and to connect with that primal element. Well, I think the world of fighting and the world of dance are not that far apart, and I'm so excited to have George here with us today, who I first got to know by seeing this sensational video on YouTube, George, where you're talking about your background as both a dancer and a martial artist growing up in Georgia. So tell me from your point of view, and you talk about it a little bit in that video, but if you could get into a little bit more, how does the physicality and the technique of martial arts and dance connect? I would think it would be so hard to separate one from the other, and at the same time, I bet there are elements of each that you can capitalize on for the other.
Well, absolutely. To not going too deep, if you compare, like, again, not like I ever practiced Kung Fu, but, or like if we go in Japanese karate, the kata, it's even shadow boxing in kickboxing or boxing or in the Muay Thai, right? It's definitely dance. Muay Thai is definitely dance, right? You're trying to inspire yourself. So to say the way I was training in both, it's the choreography which you in the fight you try to impose your choreography to your opponent. So my choreography is better because you know your coach told you move your legs this way, so you basically dancing you want him to dance where you want to dance, you know.
Yeah.
And it's in a fight, but in a stage you're just repeating the same, right? You're just alone or you're with a partner. So I think the muscle memory, it's the connection between the dance and the fighting, because the repetition, I always repeat the repetition in the both, like to do the, I don't know, like Ippon Sayonage in judo, you just drop and you drop and you drop and you drop and you drop, or in, like, I don't know, you do double leg in wrestling, you just do it, and in dance you just do and jump and again and again and again. So that's the definitely connection. I don't want to say like it's exact connection, but it's like choreography, right? It's some kind of choreography. You know that you touching his leg, he's gonna move here, and then you drop him. So the same way as at the stage fighting, right? How many times, I'm pretty sure Joseph has some anecdotes, how many times, even I have this anecdote, I punch when in the Prodigal Son, there is in Balanch's choreography, there is like fight, I knock out my friend, my good friend in Thanksgiving was General rehearsal. I knock him out, not like I wanted, because you follow music, and you know, it's like in the movie, you hit and he moved, boom, and he just knock out.
Whoops.
And everybody like, what you just did? I'm like, guys, so sorry, I really didn't want it, but didn't mean it. So it's basically, it's like if you ask me, the preparation of the dancer right now, we see more and more that it's basically athleticism, right? And it's as more we seeing, I don't know, that like MMA came up, and we see that the fighters, it's not just like, you know, one thing who is punching, it's really smart fight. Mm-hmm. It's like you have to absorb so much information, right? Nowadays the MMA fighter is just, it's the professional, I don't know, athlete in so many martial arts, right? Like you have to know wrestling, you have to know boxing, you have to know jiu-jitsu, my big background, like Greco-Roman wrestling, you know, so you have to know so much, and you have to connect that. So I believe that is as a choreography, you know, to connect these different martial arts together. It's still kind of choreography, right, Greg? I'm not lying when you're training someone and you do, like, I don't know, you jab, duck under, boom, and then double leg. It's a choreography, right? It's not me. It doesn't mean it's going to happen in the fight, but it's a choreography, right, Greg? So I believe that it's pretty close. It's just maybe in the stage you're not punching each other, but the kata or whatever you want to call it is shadow boxing. It's very similar.
Yeah,
that's absolutely right.
Patterns and repetition. Yeah, Greg. I mean, I think to master a single technique, there's that famous, you know, Bruce Lee quote. I don't fear the man that, you know, knows 10,000 kicks. I fear the man that has practiced one kick 10,000 times. I mean, and the beauty of the martial arts, the beauty of dance, and probably this goes for stage combat as well. You know, it emerges when people build a fluidity, right, in the technique itself, where they've repeated it so many times that it's inevitable that they're going to slip this punch and, you know, come back with a cross. I think it's beautiful. Joe, you said something interesting in our correspondence going back and forth before today about formal training getting in the way of making realistic stage fighting. That was really intriguing to me. You talked about your fencing background. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. First of all, I need to preface it with any performer who has any kind of physical training, any kind of athleticism, any kind of familiarity with being able to move in space connected to their breath, awareness of their body. I mean, that's always a positive thing. So in no way am I saying, like, you know, you shouldn't be trained. I mean, you should be on the couch. I'm not saying that at all. But what I am saying, you know, all three of us have alluded to muscle memory and repetition. And this is where fundamentally stage combat is intended to make sure that everyone's safe. And that is much different than real fighting, because that is the direct contrast. So if I have training, and this was my experience, like if I'm a trained fencer and I have a habitual muscle memory ability to hit my targets on body. And if I then have to say, well, now I'm doing stage combat and it is 100% a necessity to be able to hit off body, so all of my targets are never going to hit my partner, then I'm already in conflict with my own body. And that's something that I will definitely need to drill over and over and over and over again. And so that's where, you know, having a certain skill set that isn't the skill set that you're actually trying to apply to the stage combat can prove more dangerous than having no skill set at all. And so that's where I need to be very aware of what, you know, the habitual training someone might have, and then be able to try to drill that out of them to ensure that their partner is going to be safe. You know, that story that we just heard about the punching and then the dancing, it was Balanchine. Yeah, I mean, it's like, that's exactly the situation. Yeah. I mean, like, that's exactly the situation. And like, it happens. And like, we just need to drill it out. And like, you know, that's just the only concern that sometimes happens, especially if people are tired or if they've been overworking, or like, you know, any number of things could happen where somebody just slips up. And, and it's only because someone is so well trained. And that's a good thing, except we were trying to make sure that everything's safe. So
right. No, that makes a lot of sense. You know, going from George's world, I also relate this to experiences that I had in college. I used to be a Taekwondo instructor. That was my sort of gateway into martial arts. Greg, you and I are the same age. I don't know about you, but I started in Taekwondo. A lot of folks started as kids, and that led me to a love of martial arts going through later on. But part of the way that I paid for my ramen during college was teaching Taekwondo at Tufts. And George, whenever I had dancers that joined the club, they always had incredible flexibility and, incredible active, static flexibility that could hold that leg up. But they struggled tremendously with the snap, And I actually trained for a summer in Kyokushin in New York in that school in Midtown in the 20s. You have to have that snap to have that power. You must. When I think about you and how you have to go through, the filigree of ballet versus something like as hard as Kyokushin, do you ever have a problem like turning it off?
So, well, to go to that connection, I never told my dance teacher that I was doing karate.
Is that right?
Yeah, because he was always joking. What, like in dance class, like, what do you think is Taekwondo? Or like, what do you think is like karate? And you're like, yeah, this actually it is. And you're like, yeah, that's what I'm training. So of course it's difficult, right? Sometimes some kicks, even in the difficult jumps, like the acrobatic jumps, what you do in advanced ballet, right? And you think like, you know what, if I do like a little bit away from the classical ballet, it's easier. And they're like, oh, that was good. Why you don't do like that? And you're like, yeah, I actually did completely like martial artist. I didn't even think about, and sometimes it's working even better, and so if you ask me, sometimes you don't click from, you're not switching off, and it's like even better, right?
Yeah,
so
interesting.
Yes, it is.
Maybe that has something to do with just connecting to that move authentically. You've done that kick, you've held that posture, for hundreds of hours, and you're able to just bring it energy level.
But the same like you're watching the guys from Muay Thai, and they it's the same like a dance. They kicking back like, I don't know, 100 times. That's what dancer does. He just kicks, but just not punching. He just elevates the leg so many times. Now saying that which is difficult to switch, it's when you're, let's say this way, when you are dancing or performing an opera, and you should be the coward, right? You should be the betrayer, and someone should be slapped in the face, and you have to be like running, like, oh my God. So this is sometimes difficult. You're standing from someone who has no clue how to fight, and he's a hero, and he does to you, bam, and you're like, really good. I mean, and you have to do like, oh boy. So maybe this is fun. You like think like, you know what? I can beat this guy. Why he's a hero and I'm the...
I love it.
Yeah. So we're following the stories.
Yeah. No, it is.
It's because you're the bass and not the tenor.
Yeah, maybe. I always compare, the real fight with with a stage fight, it's not exactly, but you know, Bruce Lee said like Jackie Chan, he was like all the Bruce Lee's fights were like and my video is like you know, so that's there for me is like more stage fight. It's like, you know, he hits and instead of be superpower, he just hits and then he cries and
I remember that.
Take so much damage.
I remember when I was doing stage combat scenes in opera. I remember that a huge part of the technique was showing people where the pain. Oh, you know, yes. After you get slapped. That's probably not a popular approach in the world of MMA, Greg, to demonstrate actively to your opponent when something hurt them.
Yeah, it might. Well, it would go well over with your opponent, I think, but maybe not so much.
Exactly. Well, thank you. I'll do that again. Mm-hmm. So, Greg, you were super humble at the beginning, which I appreciate. But I just have to tell you, I loved Kingdom so much. You know, it really. So I watched it when my wife and my two girls were out of town this summer, and I needed something. I wasn't training Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, which I've been doing now for the last 2 years. I just gotten my blue belt before COVID, so it still has all of the creases in it. I'm just gonna get killed when I get back. You know, it's gonna be awful. But I loved Kingdom so much because I got to see so much technique. And appreciating the fact that I'm like, you know, I'm super respectful of people that have just put so many years of training into making things fluid and invisible. I think you did such a great job of turning jiu-jitsu into something that I could see on the screen. I think you had like an omoplata in the first episode of Kingdom. I'm like, wow, I didn't think anyone would try to put that on. What did you have to do to make that work? And did you put moves into your choreography of either that show or of Warrior, where you're like, well, this would absolutely never ever work, you know, flying armbar or something like that, but you knew it was going to work theatrically.
Right. Well, I think that's one of the most important aspects, at least in my very limited knowledge of it, is that it's much more about the emotion, I guess, I think that is conveyed in the fight, because really that's what most people are watching it for, is inspiration and you know, the emotional content within, as far as stage stuff. So yeah, you had to walk a thin line. I remember in Warrior. So again, I stage combat is not my forte. I'm not as well trained as the other two, or even close. But so walking that line between, okay, well, that's highly unrealistic, and this is something that's going to be exciting for people to watch, like professional wrestling, right? I mean, that's another thing that you have to stage. It's basically stage combat. It's a lot less safe than opera, I think, but it's that same kind of thing where you have
less safe than opera.
Yeah. I think that walking that line there is something that's really. So let's say that you're a special forces operator. Every movie you watch, you're going to, you know, you'd never clear a room like that. You know what I mean? Like, you get that kind of a guy. But I think some of the points that Joe has made there is that, like, that you're not watching it for that, right? Like, this isn't a documentary about how to clear rooms or how to fight a dragon or anything like that, right? It's much more about, it's got to be semi-realistic, but you're going to have to suspend disbelief. Like, I'll watch silly Marvel movies and I get all excited when Thor gets his hammer and starts beating on, you know what I mean? I'm not like, well, technically you wouldn't be able to throw your hammer in that methodology. Like, just let it go, dude. Like, enjoy what it is, and get into the emotion of it. And so I think from my very limited skill set, trying to do that, to convey that, was a challenge. And I had Joe Stevenson really did a lot of the legwork there. But I in Warrior, I tried to convey a little bit of that. The whole second half of Warrior, Beethoven's Ninth is one of the big kind of center things of that. And it was me trying to convey that emotional beauty that you feel with music, with martial arts, with everything, at least in that context. So I think following that line, you've got to have some kind, I mean, obviously, like, and no one's going to watch an MMA movie where you hit the guy and he spins 16 times in the air and falls. Like, it's just like a kung fu movie, you know what I mean? Like that. Right. But at the same time, you're going to be doing maybe flying arm bars that work sometimes, but, you know, it's a high risk for reward scenario that you wouldn't exactly, if you're trying to win a world title, I wouldn't tell, listen, George St. Pierre, please go and do a flying arm bar to this guy. right? Does that make sense? So,
Yeah.
and again, there's so many cool factors that because of the parameters that you're dealing with, safety being a big one. I mean, I thought that was so insightful. You have to keep your performers safe. Otherwise, there's not a lot of point in doing it. Stuff like that, working outside of, is one of the reasons that I enjoy doing that so much, is that it takes me out of what I usually do, which is, again, making things invisible, making things confusing for opponents and for audiences as well, and reversing that. So that was my kind of joy in my small exposure to that world.
No, that's very cool. Was there a big learning curve when you were just getting started in that? Did you have to look at the dailies and say, oh man, I really have to go about, I would think it would be particularly difficult with grappling sequences, saying, oh, I've really got to find a way to blow this up a little bit more? Or did it come naturally to you to some extent?
Well, for me, it was a lot of like learning about angles on film stuff, which actually helped me a lot. Like for me, I'm always looking outside of mixed martial arts or martial arts in general to try to pull back ideas into combat. So just having directors explain to me, okay, here's the little box that you're looking through. And this is film, right? This is in stage combat, which is like very different. But so this is, I mean, in this, you have this angle, I have to be able to see what's happening with the drama of the fight scene. That was a big learning curve. And then thank God I had like stunt guys that had been there forever. They were going like, no, that's not going to work, Greg. Like you can't, we're going to have a camera on this angle. So that was a huge learning curve. Thank God I had people around me that were a lot smarter than I was, that could whack me in the head and be like, that's not going to work. So yeah, it was a huge learning curve. Definitely super fun. And I love to learn. I'm super curious. So it was a great time.
That's awesome. So sort of building on this idea, we talked a lot about individual techniques and how you adapt them. And we talked about sort of the core physicality of these different forms. But on top of that, we're talking about these things a lot like a musical arc or a dramatic arc. And so you seat these techniques inside storytelling, and I think that probably happens. It happens in a fight, sort of looking back, how a fight peaks in round 3. They drop back down, they get their strength back. Someone comes in and gets a knockout in round 5. So sort of looking backwards, you can see that dramatic arc. But Joe, for your work in stage combat, you have to conceive of that arc from the outset. They don't just go straight for the death blow. What are the key elements to sort of building that story up? How do you, I'm thinking of a more expansive fight scene. How do you start the drama at one point, bring it to another? What are the kinds of approaches you need to employ to get that big storytelling over a period of time?
Yeah, I mean, what's cool about opera opposed to, like, let's say like a Shakespeare, because the Shakespeare, you're going to do your text and then you fight, and the fight will happen, and maybe there'll be text somewhere in between there, like thou dost, no, like whatever. But like with opera, you're dictated by the music. Mm-hmm. and the music also builds that dramatic structure for you, which is incredibly helpful, and it really kind of fills in a lot of blanks that otherwise you would just need to make up for yourself. Mm-hmm. That being said, one of the most important things is character. Mm-hmm. To really do your script analysis, to understand, well, who are the people, and then knowing that, like, what are the stakes for any engagement, what are the given circumstances, why are they in their fight, and then who wants what from the other person and to what end. Who's the aggressor, who's the victim, who's the person who's, potentially the protagonist, the antagonist. And that's all going to dictate how people interact with each other. Like, who's going to throw the first punch? Whenever there is an engagement, knowing that this isn't, like, most fights, a lot of people don't know that they're actually about to start a fight. Unless it's like, hey, this is said duel, like in Faust, like, we're dueling. And it's like, okay, but it's very clear that Faust, like, he was a wimp. He's not a good fighter. And so, he should look bad until the devil, like, gets in there and it influences the outcome of the narrative. And so that's where, you need to just look at the whole spectrum of who are the people, and then what would their behavior be physicalized, mm-hmm. and then try to, make up something that kind of tells that story. Especially when it comes to people who aren't skilled combatants. I would always prefer to have fairly simple choreography where a talented performer can just invest fully in a more easy fight to tell a much more believable, clearer story.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I want to, you gave me a perfect segue to come over to George, because in George, in your world, when you are choreographing sequences where you're building dramatic tension, or if there's a fight in ballet, you're dealing with people that have already the core physicality, they have all the training, you have this incredible toolkit to operate from. Is your experience like Joe's in terms of those elements, the stakes? Are you thinking that way in terms of those key theatrical points, or do you think of the storytelling approach in a different way?
I would say it's a mix, you know. Well, dancers are athletes, right? Whatever you want to call it, how you want to call it, they're athletes. They are not fighters, definitely. And see, they do not try to hurt you, right? So let's say when you're fighting in Romeo and Juliet, right? The fight should be super long between Tybalt and Mercutio, and it should be funny. So to make sometimes the Tybalt is the nicest guy, and Mercutio is the worst guy in a dressing room who is telling everybody, and he's like cockfighter, right? You like, just come on, dude, just relax. You're not fighting, and he gets that role, right? And he's supposed to be the nice guy. So that's the problem, right? I'm pretty sure that's happening in the movies sometimes, in opera. The nicest guy should be the baddest guy, right? So if you ask me, when you choreograph, you just I think Joseph is right. It's just the story dictates. The problem is there that both the dancers, if it's stage fight, they're very well trained. It's just, I think it comes to personality, right? Sometimes it's like let's fight, and you'll say, you know what, your character is not like that. You should be calm, you know, you are the noble. And you're like, yeah, but I want to punch him because I think, you know how it is, like, I think my character, and you're like, no, it's not. It's not.
Well, why do all the characters in the ballets that George choreographs know Kyokushin-kai Karate? That's so unlike.
I'm gonna tell you a funny story. So I was the Tybalt, right? And everybody, oh, he's gonna be such a great Tybalt. And my friend, former principal of Royal Birmingham Ballet, he was Romeo, handsome man, very big. When he was transforming in Romeo, let's say this way, when I walk out of stage after I die, I always go to my wife and I'm like, he just killed me. He really killed me. I had he was cutting my face, my arms, like blood everywhere. But he's the nicest Scottish guy. He was, Georgie, I'm sorry, my Scottish accent. Like, Georgie, you okay? And I'm so sorry. I'm like, dude, you can relax on the stage. You know, I'm gonna die. You don't need to kill me, really. So he was just cutting like so much. I'm like, oh my God. So sometimes it's very interesting. Like, someone who is not a real fighter just gets so explosive in that moment.
Wow, the world of dance seems a lot more dangerous than I conceived of
Oh, yes.
discussion today. Greg, coming over to you, storytelling, and I don't want you to divulge any industry secrets. You're a master of your art, but I'm always interested when I'm hearing Joe Rogan or someone else talking about a big fight that's going to come up, and they talk about how they see a fight playing out over a series of rounds. That they're clearly looking at it from the experience of what does this what's this fighter's background, what are their strengths, are they someone that sort of starts slow and builds up over time? Do you prepare fighters for an arc of time? Do you say, if it's a 5-round fight, you sort of pace them through, you think thematically about the kinds of approaches that they're going to use in the ring beforehand? Or is it more that you're building combinations, techniques, you get some general ideas, we're going to close off the ring or whatever it might be, and it just evolves naturally? Or maybe it's a combination of the two.
Well, that's a complicated question. I don't want to take the entire rest of the time to talk about that. Step on. I'm learning so much from our other guests. So I'll put it this way. the easiest way to feel about how you actually put a real game plan together, because what you were talking about is analytics, and analytics are a very important part of MMA. But basically, it's that this guy throws this many jabs, and then he tries to do these things, and that really that's one of the tools for combat, but it's not a huge one. Okay, so think about it this way. Everybody, when you're pushed, you have something that you do when you're afraid. So if you're very afraid of a situation, you will do a certain thing that has worked for you in the past that you will go to again that will help you deal with that fear. And everybody has a different one. Sometimes it's before you go out on stage, maybe you have stage fright, and so you do a certain ritual, whatever that is, to calm you down. Maybe you watch We Were Kings and to get yourself psyched up, whatever ritual you do to deal with nerves. So my job is to find what you do during a fight when you get punched hard in the face. What do you do when things aren't going your way? Do you try to do a double leg takedown? Do you try to use a lot of movement to stay away from that? So, and I always call that the teddy bear. People have a teddy bear that they want to hold on to.
I love that.
when they're afraid. So my first
teddy bear
time
is a double leg takedown.
Right. Well, whatever it may be, right? So I watch for that teddy bear. And then you need to figure out, okay, well, how can we get our opponent to that place where they're trying to cling on to that teddy bear? And the easiest way I think you can understand it musically, because all fighting is rhythm, and I think that's one of the huge commonalities. And again, I don't know anything about choreography compared to our two other people, but dealing with rhythm, everything in fighting is rhythm. It's the heartbeat of combat. So it's very musical in that you change the rhythm, you mess with the rhythm, you increase the rhythm over time, depending on where you are in the fight. But you're always looking for that theme, and the theme is that teddy bear. So again, like a fugue in music, like it's you come out with this little theme, and then you move away from it and you kind of dance around it, and then it comes back for a little bit. You're trying to get them back there, and then they counter you and you swing around. But you're always looking for that underlying psychological theme. And the rest of the technique, the notes of the music or the choreography of whatever you're doing, is trying to elicit that response so that you can get them to mentally break or go unconscious, whichever comes first. So that underlying structure there is, I think, very similar to stage combat, in that you are going to, once you have this theme, this idea, it plays out over time, but you're always trying to go back to that place. And how you do that is very rhythmic. How you do that is very, I mean, again, George St. Pierre is one of the best articulate fighters that I've ever trained. And he would always say, you can't handle, I will set a rhythm that you cannot handle. You cannot handle my rhythm, it would be the exact quote. And that's what we were talking about, is underneath it all is very musical. And again, like I learn a ton about fighting from classical music, like hemiolas, or the way that you, especially counterpoint stuff, the way you flip Bach, the way you inverted stuff, like all that stuff. Again, I'll take up the rest of the time. Let me shut up a minute. But all of that stuff directly correlates to combat. And so I could watch both of their choreography, stage combat, and I would learn, especially rhythmically and just storytelling, how to get because our story is we want to break you. Their story is they want to convey the drama. But there's huge parallels there. And I learn a lot outside of MMA about MMA, if that makes any sense.
No, that makes a tremendous amount of sense. And I think I'm going to shudder a little bit the next time I hear a good hemiola. That's
it's a note between note, right? Yeah, interrupting the technique before the inception or the.
Oh, it makes total sense. It makes total sense.
Joseph, I want to piggyback on that for a second. I mean, I think we're really hitting to the correlation between all three of your guests right now and how they really connect to each other, because what we're talking about is the reality of combat. And, 100% stage combat's just about the illusion. And fundamentally, what are you doing with your other performer is that you are dancing with your other performer, because it's a true partnership. And there is nothing that's surprising about it, because everybody knows the choreography, and that's where it is dance. But what's really cool is that the illusion needs to telegraph, again, what those moments are of the different performers trying to unlock the weakness in the other character. So I always like to say, it's a silly thing, but like that, the oh yeah, oh no moments, where it's like, when someone's having their oh yeah moment, the other person's having their oh no moment, and then vice versa. Like who has the upper hand, who has the lower hand, and then that's the acting that's always infused into the choreography, but fundamentally it is dance. So how do you break up the rhythm so it doesn't look so fluid? So you're actually seeing the different ideas happening, which is the illusion of fighting. But fundamentally, it really is just two people dancing together to do the illusion of violence.
Yeah, no, it's so cool. You know, George, you were saying something earlier about choreography. I think the word you used was imposition. There's an imposition of will, there's an imposition of technique. You're creating a controlled situation, and with both your work and Joe's, between your work in ballet, I should be specific, George, and Joe's work in stage combat, you're operating within a rhythmic and musical structure that aligns the characters even as they're in conflict. And what Greg's talking about is the imposition of one person's rhythmic structure on another's that may have two different tempos altogether. In fact, probably have to have two different tempos if you're going to achieve that imposition of will. That's rhythm. It's the great connector. You're right, Joe. It's so cool. George?
I always thought when I compete in judo and Greco-Roman wrestling, I always saw my way as a dancer. So when you're dancing with a lady, you're trying to maintain her in the balance so she doesn't fall, so she moves very well, and you maintain her balance. So when I was competing in judo, I always saw as a dance. So I have to be bad dancer to make him to step on my foot, you know. I swear, I really saw. And again, when someone throw me, I'm like, oh my gosh, he make me dance his dance, you know. It's just, and the same in wrestling, right? In Greco mostly. Like you're moving him and sit there and they're like, oh, he's going with me. And you know, it's like big tango, whatever you want to call, you know? So it's definitely a rhythm, and who has a better feeling of the rhythm there, the wins, you know? So I would agree with both guests that it's so amazing, you know? It's just still the same body, it's just different focus and approach.
Wow.
What if I always step on the girl's foot?
Yeah,
Okay, well.
that means you have a judo black belt, Joe. Wow, I didn't realize I could get there that fast. I've already achieved mastery. That's amazing. But it also makes total sense, George. So wrap up question. Fight Club's one of my favorite movies, and I thought, well, I've got these guys on the show today, and you all have some experience with opera, some contact with either opera or a classical form like ballet. And George, you're going to get the choice of art form on this one. But if you had to pick a street fight with a character from an opera, who would it be and why? And I think I'm going to throw this to it to George first. You could choose a ballet character.
Gosh. Yeah, you just kill me here. So it has to be.
It sounds like whoever played Mercutio in that show.
Yeah. So it has to be opera character who I would find.
You can make it a ballet character, but someone you think that would be worth the challenge.
Oh, interesting.
I'm going to let you ponder that. I'm going to bounce over to Joe Isenberg while you noodle on this, George. Joe, you've had a chance to work with a lot of opera singers. We're not talking about the singers. I want to be clear. That's just assault. But
I still want to work in opera. So I love all of them.
But okay, so if you had to pick one character from an opera that you would engage in a street fight, who would it be and why? This is the Brad Pitt, Edward Norton scene.
Yeah, I was thinking about this, and the first answer it has to be Faulkner, because if you have to fight, I mean, if you want to fight a
giant,
you get that opportunity. But beyond that, I mean, I would say Siegfried, because like he's just like, come on, I just can't, like, come on.
Okay, I'll go with Siegfried. I like that.
I do want to add one thing, and they can edit this out later. This is just for it's just a fun anecdote that I think that we'll appreciate. Is what's really cool about film. And this is going to what we were talking about, how the stunt guys were like, you know, well, this won't work quite as well with the angles and stuff. And because it is all illusion, the angles are so important. What's cool about film is that it's a two-dimensional plane, right? And opera is actually much more akin to cinema than other kind of theatrical contexts, because it really is, the proscenium creates a two-dimensional plane. So you can really get away with a lot of the same tricks that you can get away with on camera in opera stage combat. So that's just a funny little.
No, that's interesting.
Little coincidence.
I hadn't thought about the similarities of those two forms. That might be fodder for a future episode of this show. Actually, now that I'm thinking about it. Okay, Greg, you apologized in an email to me saying that, well, you're Puccini and Wagner guy. You're sort of like a core opera repertoire lover, which I just love. And there are a lot of bad guys in those operas. Joe already got Fafner out there.
Yeah.
If you had to get in there in the ring and tangle with a character from an opera, do you know who it would be and why?
Well, for sure, I'm going to go a little unorthodox. I would go with Elmer Fudd in their little send up of Wagner of their Wagner stuff, knowing that I could full well just pull his helmet down and probably have an easier fight there. I would definitely, in the Kill the Rabbit, I would definitely go with Elmer Fudd.
Wow,
he would be the villain that Wagner would probably be very mad at me for even saying so, but. That's
Joe Specter is happy about it. I love that. I thought you were going to go for someone difficult. I was seeing sort of like Scarpia. Greg's going to take on the big challenge. You're like, no, nope. I want someone I could whoop real quick and get home, have a steak.
I'm no fool.
Elmer Fudd from the Kill the Rabbit Wagner send-up. Okay, fantastic. George,
okay. Yes, I will go with Puccini probably. I would have two.
Okay.
To be honest, if I'm not mistaken, I think it's Puccini. I would try to fight Macbeth because it's always that dark, but the guy is amazing warrior, right?
Yeah. Okay. So all right. That's Verdi, actually. That's an opera that Joe choreographed recently at the Metropolitan Opera, if I'm not mistaken.
I'm not mistaken. It's Puccini, right?
That's Verdi.
Verdi. Sorry, I said Puccini. Sorry. But if you ask me, the Macbeth, I think it's the scariest dude to fight because it's just totally crazy head and just amazing warrior who coming with all these ideas. But if you ask me who I want to beat, that's why I'm going with Puccini. When I perform an opera too, every time Leo has to die in Turandot, I always want to run and just beat these guys. And so like,
oh, wow, saving Leo. I love it. That's fantastic. Defending the honor of the core secondary soprano. Indeed.
Yeah. She's like, when she's crying, I always like, no.
What a great opera. That's a great note to tie off on. Guys, this has been just a phenomenal conversation. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have. I don't know if it's possible.
Fantastic.
But
yeah, thank you.
So much fun. And we look forward to seeing everyone on our next episode of UnMic'd. Thank you for joining us for this episode of UnMic'd, where we blur the edges that connect the world of opera to just about everything else. The new episode will be released each month, so be sure to check our website, azopera.org, join our email list, and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. UnMic'd is a part of Arizona Opera's Connection Lab program, a new series of digital and public offerings designed to facilitate a connection between Arizona communities familiar with our company, as well as opera goers and others well beyond our state. Arizona Opera is grateful to our lead digital sponsors for the 2020-21 season, Ron and Kay McDougall. Arizona Opera's Next Gen programs are made possible through the support of Karen Fruin, Roma Witkoff, Jeanette J. Siegel, the Valentine Family Foundation, APS, and Jody Paluzzi. To learn more about the programs that are part of Arizona Opera Next Gen, please visit us online at azopera.org.